here at the railroad station. Probably 45 minutes to an hour early. My usual paranoia. Like train stations. I'm going to go over and look at these old hand carts. This is an old cart that repairmen would use, but I've never seen one that was bicycle driven. That's interesting. First time I've seen that, and tandem. And then this, of course, just a station baggage cart. Modern train, but it only runs about a 2-hour schedule down to Castleventrano and then back up to Trapani again. Came from the railroad station, which is about a half a mile to the right of that street light, and I've come down here by asking people to Cafe Escobar, which I had learned from the internet was where I pick up the bus for Agrigento later today. And talking to the man here, he didn't speak English nor Spanish, he was Portuguese, but he managed to communicate to me that way back up to the bus station I can catch the same bus right here, and then when I come back from Selinunte, I just asked the bus driver to drop me off at the bar, which he can do, and then I get the bus from Agrigento and I'm done. All of this had to be learned off the internet. In other words, there's no access to that information. You just have to come here and learn it. The gentleman in the Escobar graciously let me put my bag behind the seats in the bar where it can't be seen, but he can see what's going on with it, and so it'll be there, and didn't want any money for that, so that's all taken care of. I'm going to take my day pack with me because I can live out of my day pack for indefinitely. Excellent. I also have my passport and all my euros, which is about $1,400 worth, so with that I can live indefinitely. I also have credit cards. Here for the bus, as is this young man here. Not sure whether it's coming on that side or coming on this side. I've got 3 different opinions. 2 for this side, 1 for that. Actually, 1 for each side and 1, well, who cares, for both sides. But I got hit up by a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses, but since they fortunately speak only Spanish, all they could do was smile a lot and talk a lot in Spanish, and I just would be ignorant. It was entertainment until my bus comes. Okay, this is Selinunte Archaeological Site. Hand out any literature, they rely on you to read these interpretive signs. And the important, I'm just going to dictate this, most of the important remains are found on the hill of the Acropolis inside the Hellenistic fortifications. Remember, this is a Greek facility. The only part that was saved from the systematic destruction after the Carthaginian siege of 409 BC. A great deal of this is unexcavated at this point. Here's what it might have looked like. Some ongoing reconstruction, or at least preservation. This site pretty much difficult to reach by individual tourists unless you've gone through the process I go through. It's not published. If I had time, I should publish it. So it's really left up to tour buses to come here, which frankly I'm sure the government prefers was the case, since that's a cash cow function. Not sure if the fluted indicates it was Doric by definition, or whether Ionic, which did not have pedestal or bases, could also have had fluting. I just don't recall. Where we can see those domino detail at least a little bit on the edge there, what remains. Too much grass for me to really determine whether there's a curvature there, but I think you can see a curvature. Remember, it's very slight relative to the eye. See a little bit of the detail on those capitals. Very simple. Some are in reasonably decent condition, like that one right there. And back there you can see a remnant of the wall enclosing the cella, and there the altar area, that large block to the right. Detect any difference in the width of this corner column and the one to its left, and that may be the whole point. It looks like there's been some restoration to those drums, as well as that altar back part. You can see there's more columns in there. And notice these huge stones that sometime in the past tumbled off the top. Many of them may have been just those base stones that you see up there, forming, for lack of a better term, the stairway up to the temple grade. There we can see the remains of where the, I think they're called metopes, would be, or the sculpted panels might have been right up in those square areas there. So a little bit left. It's interesting when we build these structures that we never imagine when we're putting up big, huge chunks of column like this one is versus the kind we usually see, that someday they may fall. Someday what is a pristine, carved, fluted column drum becomes eroded and pocked by weather, until some event like war or earthquakes or time or 9/11 collapse that time frame, and we get this. You wonder how they got knocked down, though. I mean, it sounds like an interpretive sign that it was a conscious act by conquerors. But how do you consciously tear down something this big? Are the stones that precarious you can throw a rope around, get enough men on the other end to literally pull down a wall? Perhaps. Pretty good remains of the stairway stones, and you can see where it's been supported there by cement. Here's one column with what looks like two of those massive, maybe two of the massive column sections and a smaller one, and there some column in the back we'll take a look at. Look at the huge stone jutting out from that far pile on the right. The irony of those square holes designed to prevent what we see. Here I'm inside what once was this temple. There, perhaps the base of the temple floor itself, if not that large altar section, or separate room too, where the cella is. Now how to weave my way out of here. And look at how there's been an attempt in the dark past to at least stabilize some of this. Here we're looking at the underside. In other words, the side that faced down on the edge of the top, because there's our domino details. The little lizard up on that rock that scrambled out of the way, but not too far. It's pretty much used to big globs of flesh running around like us. Seemed to do him no harm in his historical record. We get an idea of the size of this structure by this base, this column base. Not to mention that huge slab that once sat up on top, I suspect. How'd they get that in the air? And there you can see a cross section of column and another base. But then another factor that tells us the size is look how far down it ranges. Reminds me of the Temple of Zeus. The time and energy it took to carve that into the perfect piece that it was in its day. Looking at the end of that large obelisk, if you will, and look at that column base askew. Perhaps it just tipped off of whatever base that it was on by sheer weight over the edge and just hung there like that. With the stones that would have formed that stairway base, still perhaps in the similar orientation, that base. How some of the scalloping of the column base is still quite well defined, as well as that lower right hand corner. That large column in the past restored to some degree, at least with cement to stabilize its structure. We're climbing up to what was probably the temple floor grade. We're probably somewhere around that now, maybe a little bit higher. Maybe we're walking on fallen stone. It's an eerie sensation, kind of like walking through Chiricahua National Park, or National Monument rather, that has those hoodoos or worn erosion features like Bryce, only they're not as brilliant as Bryce. They're more like this, just rock colored. And notice how that column fell over, but stayed pretty much aligned with itself. And there's another huge stone. Incredible. Now, here, notice this column. That may be a restored section, but it's composed of several blocks of stone. Now, I know the Romans did that, built some of their columns out of stone, I think in their later periods, and then covered it with what we see up there like a plaster. Look at the stones over there forming something like probably that altar piece near the cella. Interesting carved piece, only because it's not apparently a column. And it's not, it may be part of a base though, isn't it? But even then it looks too small for that. But maybe there were columns inside the temple itself that were smaller than those on the outside. Getting out of here is and in sometimes a three-dimensional puzzle. You look for where others have gone, hope that they actually did. I'm continuing just as a matter of form to maneuver around this temple pile, if you will. Huge base. There's a new capacity to visualize, and the walls came tumbling down of Jericho. This is interesting. At first I thought it might just be a thin, relatively thin sliver of column drum, but I can see that it isn't a precise width all the way around, so perhaps it just literally broke that way, although it's a nice clean break. But that is, as you can see from those striations, made from some kind of sedimentary rock that would naturally be in layers. That sidewalk where I just walked thousands of years ago, people walked believing that the edifice beside them was immutable, would be there for an eternity. You can see that there were these three great buildings relatively close to each other. What a sense of massive power it must have given to that society. I think Acropolis being defined as a holy area on a mountaintop, if you will. Here you can see how that wall has been and we'll see more of it, but it looks more like just a wall to support that hill, as well as provide a base, if you will, for the monuments on top of it. So this may be my far end of the other far end of the temple that we see being somewhat restored. This is the Acropolis. Most heavily defended, most important part, except maybe religious. Those other three temples had to be pretty impressive in their culture as well as ours. Sanctuary of the Southern Hill, what it might have looked like in the day. I'm standing here on this one right about there. The designs are called Megaron. I'm going to have to look that more closely. The actual worship, in other words, who was worship and what the rituals were, completely unknown, as apparently as much of what's been found but not fully excavated yet. Notice way over there we can see that first temple we were at, and there the pretty seaside temple. Quarter of the 6th century BC, another big parapetoral temple was added. 4th century BC, the two sacred areas were almost completely occupied by houses of the Punic city, while the Greek cult seemed to be at an end. In the pronos of Temple A, a Punic shrine was created just before the final abandonment of the city in 250 BC. Notice these drums don't look quite so large as the other temples we saw. And yet this was the holiest of the holy places. And a cistern, perhaps. And here's the original flooring. I think water was always a part of rituals. This looks like it's a part of a wall, but I don't think so, because some of those are base stones that are turned on edge. I think these were put in here to give this building some relatively recent definition, if you will. These structures may be those Punic homes that were built here during their era of control. Plastered and probably painted, and maybe with actual paintings for decoration. Oh, the pile of rubble, as seen from here, and some of those drums, unless they just didn't break apart, are really huge. Guesses that some of these stones were replaced. But this does look like the stepped base for the temple. Just so much rock. Two large drums. There the wall or the temple area on the inside. To reconstruct all of this without some kind of diagram in your hands. But certainly I'm standing where there was some kind of a entryway or maybe even a ramp up on top of this platform. This looks like a little temple here that might have existed, since the steps go up this way and there's a wall preventing much else. Again, these look like a stepped up, and there may be a temple there. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Interesting flower I haven't seen before. City on the Acropolis. I gotta get out of here. Comes a group. All of this is probably the Punic city. Now, whether that means they had their own large buildings as well as residences, I don't know. Interesting to see remnants like this and wonder. What it looked like. But look at the curious figure with its tongue out. Temple of the Acropolis, built around the second half of the 5th century BC. Kronos was accessible through a large double doorway whose main doors were made of 3 mobile elements, as shown by traces of curved tracks on the threshold. That's interesting. And these are probably more of the Punic homes. Almost looks like a Punic developer had a plan and put in all of them at once. You can see how they're divided into rooms. Looks like 3, 1, 2, 3. If they were clever, they used the indentations in the original stones for their own purposes. Assessment was wrong. That looks like this is that far end. There's the southeastern end of this big temple. And the rest of the temple went this way, I guess. It's curious that there is a temple with the stairs, and yet I'm standing on a base with stairs. So what was here? And there is what looks like the huge temple, bigger than these 2 areas. And it doesn't seem to go behind me, so I think maybe my initial assessment was correct, that it goes that way. In fact, see the drums over there? It does go that way. So these must have been 2 other smaller drums. But that must have been an impressive temple. Got a pretty plant again. This temple here was no slouch. God, the effort involved is what boggles my mind whenever I see things like this. Here, Mexico's, Peru, looks like a little street between these sets of houses. The gain by visiting places like this, just to lock them into your brain. The charisma of place. Looks like a long building, but it uses as its far wall the outside wall around this entire complex, I believe. Pretty obvious this is some kind of a monumental base for statue or some kind of statuary monument. See this wall that surrounded the city and realize also how large this city was. And then here, it wraps around, and then over there, beyond this immediate wall, you can see the continuation of the wall. It's interesting because as I work my way along the inside of the wall, we come to an actual intersection in the old town. We'll continue alongside the wall itself. There's another street, just like we divide blocks of houses with streets. Not too intimidated by me. Not making too much of a rush to get out of the way. Just a little bit, being a prudent lizard. And here, what might have been a small entrance through the wall. This is steps. Interesting flower with this kind of succulent ground cover plant. Pretty array of them. Spring is such a lovely time.